I'm gonna have to tell you that either we're slipping or we're getting soft. But Hernan and Ming suggested that given the history of this event, which is probably not particularly enjoyable, at least from the point of view of people whose work is exhibited, and had to have it scrutinized au travers, either the faculty or the students. So essentially what we agreed to do, this is why the congeniality quotient at SCI-Arc is getting higher and higher, and we're getting softer and softer. I think that's why we've got the stove now in the restaurant, so we can make omelets and cheeseburgers and keep everybody smiling and so on. Whether you can make that connection or not, I don't know. I'm not sure I can make it. So I think the point is really to congratulate everyone. The level of effort, I think, is high, consistently so, and I think it's fair to say that whatever is up here, and I think we're not going to debate it, at least publicly, or we're not going to debate it again. There are any number of other propositions and projects that could have found their way into this space, and I think it's fair to say that and fair to acknowledge it. It's funny, one of the jobs of the director, what does that say? Moose, what? Holy shit. One of the jobs of the director is to speak to new students when they arrive here, and to suggest to them in the context of what SCI-Arc's expectations are from them and what their expectations might be for themselves, and looking at the work which is being processed and then what goes up on the wall after a week to see what's coming and to see what responsibilities they'll have and where their aspirations should go and all of that. And I can remember saying the last time, which I guess was a couple weeks ago, and I don't think I've ever said this before, it doesn't count. It doesn't count if it isn't built. And I think emphasizing that to them, meaning that without getting into yet another debate about the term radical, that the conception of a project in an imaginative way, as an idea, as a thought, drawings, models, content, and so on, is a piece of the effort, is a piece of the responsibility. But then, not to pick on Laura, for instance, because we're not going to talk about each project, but you look at a project like the one that Zago is trying to hide there, and you look at a project like that, and as an initiative, as a speculation, as an, no, you can stand up again, it's okay, Moose Man. And if you look at it as a speculation and a hypothesis, it's very suggestive. And as the discussion went, for some of you who heard the discussion, the question is, what's the other side of the equation? Meaning, what would it be if the obligation of the architect was to suggest a plausible way to implement it? What would it look like? And how would it transform? And whether or not this discussion, this thesis discussion, as it evolves, because I think we want it to evolve, should include a responsibility to account for the implementation of the project, which raises a lot of questions that we won't answer here, or is it enough to say, well, she didn't do it, or he didn't do it, but she did it? Meaning that the content of the thesis is the content of the thesis in the aggregate. Meaning if you add them all up, you get to where we want to go. or whether each project has a particular responsibility that is involved with the content. So I think that's an issue going forward, and the next group of characters that works its way through this process will hear more about that. The undergraduates, I think we're shifting gears a little bit. Jeff is still involved with the graduate program. Tom will be involved reviewing the undergraduates. So the emphasis or the criteria will inevitably change or be shifted as a consequence of who the primary critics will be. What else? I think the other thing I wanted to mention, as it's not so much nostalgia, but of interest to me in terms of how this process has evolved. And if you go back 8 or 10 years and look at the discussions that we had here about Thesis and whether the conception of Thesis was some arcane, anachronistic, in your terms, dated idea, and that we ought to dispense with it, dismiss it, dump it, get rid of it, and do something else. And there was a discussion here about that, which none of you students were a part of, and what we decided to do was to reinvigorate it. I think the credit for that fairly, I had to give him credit, so unworthy. Hernan ran that program, and it did a tremendous job bringing it back to a special kind of life over a period of 3, 4, 5 years, and then Elaine has taken it over and bent it in a somewhat different but equally healthy direction. But I think the point was, and the point remains, in a sense, when we look at what's on the walls, what we're looking at, again, in the aggregate, in a collective sense, we're looking at ourselves. And to be fair, we ought to add the other projects on the other walls that didn't make it into the room. Meaning that what we're looking at, in a sense, is what we collectively, SCI-Arc, faculty, exhibitions, lectures, readings, juries, what we gave to you, and we said, contemplate this, consider that, think about the other thing, you worked your way through it, and now give your rendition of what you heard from us back to us. So give us you, but it's you through our eyes, and us, in a way, through your eyes. So I think this tells us something about what we do and say, or shouldn't do or shouldn't say, and where you are. And I think in that sense, it's a very important reading of what the school prioritizes and where it ought to go, which will lead to another discussion, and the next round of that will show up roughly a year or so from now. I did want to especially congratulate Stefano for winning the Frank and Berta Prize. And Frank even showed up to give his special benediction, which was very nice. There were, I think, substantive debates about who should get what and why, but he was certainly worthy. I think he was acknowledged at graduation. We want to especially acknowledge his efforts. Beyond that, the faculty who participated in this and is really critical to this. I mean, there are always discussions about that interrelationship. In other words, I like Zago, I took 2 verticals from him, I'll grab him again, and he'll be my thesis advisor. You know, whether that kind of interrelationship between faculty who you love, or maybe better, faculty who you might learn to love, or alternatively, faculty who you hate like hell. In other words, how to make that amalgamation between the right student and the right project and so on. And this is also an ongoing discussion. and I'm not sure we'll ever get to the end of that one. Again, I want to thank the faculty for their effort and their input and their insistence, not only, and I think this is a subtlety of the process, to what extent the project belongs to you, to what extent it's guided by the faculty member, to what extent the faculty member's point of view as an architect is essentially antithetical to the work on the wall, is always an interesting question. In other words, if you went around the room, could you say, this is Zago's student, this is Elena's student, this is Hernan's student? And I think that ability for students to separate their work and to define their work not just as work that has the benediction of an advisor that you know and love, but something which in a fundamental way might be antithetical to the advisor who lets hope, has the capacity to give advice and encouragement from a point of view which is not hers or his. Anyway, I do want to thank you for your efforts and your attention and your courage and in the end, a remarkable performance. And I think that's the right word. And I think we'll try to push it further next time around, but we've done a pretty good job all around this time, so thank you very much. And here's to you. Cheers.